I think it was yesterday morning. I wanted to do a coffee talk, right? Coffee talks are something I do 3 or 4 times a month where I just go out and I just research a topic and just sort of put it out there, see who wants to join and enjoy these. These are typically longer discussions. My daily financial updates are usually 5 to 10 minutes. I'm hoping this coffee talk goes on for 15 or 20 minutes, but this will really depend on the interactions we get from folks. Um, so let's get started. First and foremost, I want to give props to a couple of people that helped me research all of this. So let me just name them so the sources are out there. A lot of this is not my data. I've just put it together in a way that makes sense. So real quick, I'm going to highlight three folks that a lot of this data came from. So Rebecca Diamond, she's an associate professor of economics at Stanford Graduate School. Found her article on brookings.edu. Joe Edgar, CEO of Tenant Cloud, found his article on entrepreneur.com. And then Gregory Bresiger, hope I'm pronouncing that close to right, found his article on Mrs. Institute. So real quick, wanted to talk about this. The reason we're talking about this is if you follow this channel, I think it was Thursday afternoon, I was aghast at something I saw from Bernie Sanders talking about national rent control. Saw him, I don't know, freaking out on stage, just being all wild about it and getting the crowd, up. And that got me thinking, right? What would national rent control look like? I live in California, where rent control is dominant in San Francisco and Oakland, and I have a place in New York that we were just at, and rent control is there. So I was like, you know, why don't we research what happened and put the facts out there? So I did, right? So I've got data from the last couple of decades, and we can have a real discussion. So let's do that. So first and foremost, I think you got to start with why is rent control at least a populist idea? And I think I think lots of ideas come from a good place. And as someone who's shared plenty of times on this channel, didn't come from great means. Affordable housing is a real problem in most of the United States, if not all the United States. Affordable housing, frankly, isn't only a U.S. problem; it's a world problem. Um, we need more affordable housing. It's a difficult problem to solve because it takes courage, it takes decades and investments, and when you, as you'll see in a minute, when you take problems that take time into a political environment that are 4 or 6, 8 years in duration, the mismatch is a problem. So affordable housing is a good goal. Absolutely. Anybody who would argue against that is either a fool or not a kind person. So affordable housing is a good thing. Next, rent shocks are real. Again, I remember many times growing up where we were in difficult situations. The economy was bad, and we were, it was a choice between paying the mortgage or the rent, if you will, and paying the electricity or food or phone. I remember being around that, and it was scary. And I didn't really know why it was scary, but I knew my parents were not thrilled. Right? You could sense that as a kid. So I get that, right? And that's people shouldn't have to live that way, right? And by rent shocks, let's not talk about $5 or $20 or even $50. It's going from 1,100 to 2 grand, right? The real things. So those are bad, right? That's something we should strive to avoid when possible. Uh, in addition, it must be said, right? As in any situation, there are bad actors. Landlords are no different. There are many landlords that are just bad apples. They do bad things. But frankly, they're bad doctors, and they're bad lawyers, and they're bad politicians, and they're bad teachers, and they're bad police officers. And let's not lump everybody together and treat everybody equal. Find a way to get the bad actors, and it takes time and all of that, but punish the bad actors, right? Go after them, right? Just like you would go after a bad doctor with malpractice, or a bad police officer for whatever it is, or a bad politician and vote him out, whatever, right? So there are bad actors. You must admit that. In addition, given that this conversation of rent control is a politically hot topic, you need to realize that politicians' jobs are really not to serve people. I mean, they like to say that all the time. That's just BS. And again, maybe some of them feel that way legitimately, but most of them don't by their acts. Their job's to get reelected. As soon as they're elected, their job is their next election. And you need to realize that, and we need to realize that because that's the system we put in place. So what does that mean? That means that politicians will be putting out headlines, attention grabbing things because they want their name attached to headlines, right? The American populace in general is so busy with so many things, we very rarely read the details, right? We're a headline-driven community and country. That said, politicians really love it when people get on camera and say, so and so did this for me, I'm so happy. So if they can find something that is popular and somebody can get on camera and say, this helped me and my family saved and all these great things, they're going to do that. Um, Here's another reality, and this is a big one, which I found in my review of New York and San Francisco. Politicians don't care if the pain is 10, 15 years away. They don't care. They don't think that far, right? They think about their next election, which is 4 years away or whatnot. So again, if they can implement something, it feels good year one, but the pain is 10 years away, they won't care because they're not around. They'll blame somebody else. Uh, and then again, just remember that politicians are doing this as a career. They don't run companies. They don't make investment decisions. And again, their job's to get reelected. So what are the real facts about America's based rent control? So I did some research on New York and San Francisco and actually a place, Cambridge, Massachusetts. We actually have examples of rent control going on multiple decades. And I wish people would look at them and look at the data and go, do we really want this happening? So a couple of things that I took across this is first and foremost, what would happen with national rent control is people would not move. So what do I mean by that, right? This came from San Francisco, 19% less moving than natural. So what's going to happen is if you get approved for a 1 bedroom, 1 bath apartment, or you get approved for a 3 bedroom or a 4 bedroom or whatever it is, 10 years from now, no matter what your living situation is, you're likely going to stay there. And this is again what politicians don't get, right? We saw this in New York as well, right? You may be a 20-something-year-old individual, get approved for a rent control studio apartment as a single individual. Fast forward 10 years, you're now in your 30s, you now have a wife, you have a kid, but because you have a rent control studio, you are going to do everything you can to stay in that studio because you don't want to give it up. Same on the flip side. Let's say you are a 40-year-old couple with 3 kids in their teens when you get approved for an apartment. Fast forward 10 years, your kids are now out and you're empty nesters. You are not going to move, right? You are going to stay in your rent-controlled apartment. So what really happens is it feels really good that first year or two when you're locked in, but when your life changes because the supply, as you will see in a moment, is not there, your ability to move up or down the available inventory is greatly reduced. And again, in San Francisco, about 1 in 5 folks were still in the same place they were just because they couldn't move, right? So you're really going to have a mismatch of inventory. You're going to have empty nesters in too big of an apartment in 10 years, and you're going to have young folks who have new families and new babies stuck in studios or 1 bedrooms because, again, they don't want to move. So that's not good, but that's what rent control does. Here's a big one, and there's no real way around this one that I could see, is the availability of units drastically reduces. In San Francisco, 25% of the available units inside of 15 years disappeared. Think about that. So how did they disappear? Really, it was one of two things. First, if you were a mom and pop and you owned something small, you sold it. You cleaned it up and you sold it to owner occupants. Second, if you owned a bigger apartment, you found any way you could to go condo. So if you are going to go to landlords and restrict their capitalistic intentions, they're going to find an alternative way. And that means they are going to kick tenants out because it is their property. They are going to fix them up and they're going to go condo or sell to owner occupants. So I want you to think about that. If we have a affordable housing problem and we are going to implement things that incent people, reward people to take inventory off the market and sell them to owner occupants to the tune of a quarter of the inventory, are you really fixing the problem or are you exacerbating the problem? You are exacerbating the problem to no end. Please go to San Francisco, please go to New York and see what you have done. You have created such a huge gap because now all the quote unquote rich people, owner occupants, are living in these $1 million things, and then there's like nothing in the middle. You have holed out or hollowed out the middle because that's what the system says. It says take my apartment building, kick everybody out, let's go condo. And if you're going to go condo, we got to add all the great finishes and the grand this and the wood floors and the big high ceilings and all of that, which is millions of dollars. And then you're going to sell them. So rent control takes inventory off the market, significant inventory off the market. The other things that happen is if you have inventory that doesn't meet certain standards or locations or just can't go condo for some reason, you are going to not repair them. You are going to band-aid them with all possibilities, make no capital improvements because you are not being rewarded. In addition, electricity is going up, your taxes are going up, insurances are going up, but you have a fixed rate of increase for your rents. You could lose the building and you'd be better off in some cases. So buildings really start to deteriorate. If they can't go owner occupant via condo or some kind of other mixed, you're basically telling landlords, band-aid instead of really invest because there's no return. So what that really means for values, and this came from Cambridge, Massachusetts, so I don't know if you know this, I didn't before I started my research, let me get this. So Cambridge, Massachusetts had rent control from 1970 to 1994. And what they found when they undid or unwound rent control in 1994 is over the next decade, $2 billion in value was created. What I mean by that is the value of the surrounding neighborhood, right? Cambridge went up $2 billion. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking all that value came from the units themselves that went from rent control to not rent control. And that's what I thought, but you're wrong. Let me get the numbers. Where is it? There it is. So what really happened is the apartments that were rent controlled that suddenly were not, their value increased 300 million. But the surrounding neighborhoods went up $1.7 billion. Think about that. So 15% of the value was in the apartments that were rent controlled that were not, but 85% of the $2 billion increase came from units that were not rent controlled. They came from owner occupants that owned stuff in those neighborhoods. So when you have apartments or rent controlled units that are deteriorating, there is a value drag on the entire neighborhood. So if you own single family homes or you happen to be a neighbor or just in the general vicinity, the value of your property is going to go down or at least be held in check because and again, go back and look at Cambridge, Massachusetts from 1970 to 1994. It is pretty frightening. The other thing to realize is how divergent rent control is again, looking at Cambridge, Massachusetts, and when the rent control was relieved, apartments that were under rent control were 40% less than the market rate. So what you were having is again, to point number one, tenants that were not moving, and then you were having everybody else pay through the nose. This is also an interesting thing I've seen in New York, where you actually have people who have rent controlled apartments making six figures and sometimes several six figures because they just don't leave, right? Maybe you got rent control when you were 21, or maybe your mom did or your dad did, and now you have a job on Wall Street. Why would you give up the rent controlled apartment? You're seeing these kinds of things in New York, and that's what the rewards say to do. So again, people are less likely to move. You're going to get an inventory mismatch. You're going to get less available units significantly. Really what happens is rent control helps current tenants year one, year two. That's what the politicians want. That's the headlines they want. That's the YouTube videos they want of people saying, "Hey, you saved me. I'm so thankful." But not realizing what you've done is in a decade, you've created a problem for the entire city, and the valuation of the entire city can be impacted. So what else do we got here? $2 billion increase. We got that. So the other thing, New York. Do you know how many units were lost because of rent control in New York? The estimate? 1 million units. 1 million units that were originally designated affordable housing have gone condo or sold to owner occupants. Rent control doesn't work. Rent control doesn't create more inventory. We have an inventory problem, folks. Affordable housing is a real concern. We have an inventory problem. Demand exceeds supply. Rent control is going to restrict supply. Not the answer. I'm sorry. For all the good intentions, it's a simple supply-demand problem. Let me make sure I got all the points. So again, at the end of the day, all the articles I read on rent control, there's a very small segment of folks that hit home runs. They get rent control and they never leave. Their lifestyle doesn't change, right? If they're single, they stay single. If they're, if you get in a big, it's just so horrible, right? When you look at all the outcomes, and actually I have a quote. Where is that quote? Oh, come on, I gotta find that quote. I circled. Where'd it go? Here it is. So here's a quote from a social democrat about rent control, which I thought was interesting. In many cases, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except bombing. Think about that. In many cases, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except bombing. This was said by Asar Lindbeck, a social democrat. I don't know who this is. I thought it was a cool quote. So at the end of the day, I just wanted to have this conversation about rent control. We actually have several cities in the Americas that we can actually go look at: San Francisco, New York, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the data is not good. Affordable housing is a supply problem. If you want to fix affordable housing, incent the creation. Rent control is a disaster. It removes inventory. So what the heck, right? We have 1 million less units in New York. We lost 25% of available units in San Francisco. If you want to go out, Mr. Bernie Sanders, and parade affordable housing and rent control, you're going to destroy cities. You are not doing the right thing. Fix the supply, incent creation. Go after and tackle the hard problems of creation, transportation, education. Don't hurt us. All right, everybody. If you find any articles that may have missed, send them to me. Happy to get your comments. I know some people are going to hate this, but again, I just had to put it out there. Rent control will destroy cities. We have examples in America. Look them up. San Francisco, New York, Cambridge. I want to once again thank Rebecca, Joe, and Gregory for their articles that I read and I cited early in this presentation. Everybody have a great day. Take care of yourself. Thanks.